Hi everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. So we'll just start today's webinar. So this webinar today is going to focus on the new features within the workflows in Civil 3D, particularly Civil 3D 2024. What we're going to do is to give a brief introduction to myself and what the content that Enrique is going to be showcasing in the platform, from the connector for ArcGIS, more the pressure network layout and editing aspect of it, the new Explorer, the transitions within the corridors, and finally finishing up with sub-assemblies. To give a brief introduction to myself, I'm the AEC Division Manager within Symmetry Europe. I have over 20 years experience within the civil and structural industry. I've moved on to a BIM manager, and now I'm kind of working with the Arcgis cloud offerings within our Elite Specialized division in Symmetry. I've used traditionally the 2D aspect back when it was just manual processes of creating longitudinal sections, corridor transitions, and so on. So transitioning across then to Civil 3D was a massive benefit. And as you can see now, and what you will see from today's presentation, is how it's moved even further. So just to give a brief introduction about Symmetry, we're now over 1,000 employees with over 400,000 users using subscriptions on a daily basis. We're spread across 7 countries, and we are up on 23 acquisitions, and with those acquisitions, they encompass 33 offices. Their revenue is now 3.1 billion SEK, which is a substantial amount of revenue. And only recently we acquired a company in the US called Team D3, which now makes Symmetry Autodesk's global #1 solution provider. So this is great news to our customers and within the Symmetry company itself. Our main ethos and mantra within Symmetry is that we challenge people to work smarter for a better future. We always push ourselves and work and empower our customers to ensure that they have the right knowledge and tools to do their daily tasks. Another part of Symmetry is our services. People might be unaware as to what we provide. We are not solely Autodesk resellers. We do other aspects of service provision, such as we do application development. We do a lot of research and development, both internally and alongside our customer base. We also do some project support with regards resourcing. We do some training workshops. We also have our own co-innovation services as well with regards digital strategy. With other customers, we do VR and AR services. We do decarbonization strategy and solution services also. Recently with some of our Irish customers and along with the UK customers, we do a lot of assessments and roadmaps, because they're starting to engage on digital workflows, and they like to get some assistance with a trusted partner like Symmetry. As part of our own work smarter processes, Symmetry have developed their own tech which can sit on top of Autodesk applications. With regards to the civil and infrastructure industry, we have built the Naviate solution will be more tailored to that. So Naviate is an extra addition to the Civil 3D interface. So these are some of the key features that will fall under the Naviate for Civil 3D. There's Naviate pipe, road, landscape, traffic, and infrastructure. I will move on now to introduce Enrique, who is our civil and infrastructure sector consultant, who is going to be showcasing these features. So I'd just like to ask one question, Enrique. Would you be able to kind of give the audience a brief overview as to your experience within your industry?
Okay, so yeah, hello everyone. My name is Enrique Barriuso, and I'm a consultant at Symmetry in the civil and infrastructure sector. I studied a master's in civil engineering, and after that I worked in the industry for about 4 years before I joined Symmetry. And within Symmetry, I started with the support team. Then I moved to training and consultancy, which is what I do at the moment. I do a lot of training and some consultancy services as well, mostly in that infrastructure sector, Civil 3D being one of the main applications. And you can see also some of the others, info trainings. We have it's becoming quite popular lately, InfraWorks, ACC. So you can see some other applications that I use. So yeah, that's about me. Today we'll focus on Civil 3D 2024, the new features for that. So I guess we can start with the light demo there. I'm going to start with ArcGIS, the new features there. The main difference here is that you can now import objects as AutoCAD objects. You don't need to do it from AutoCAD. You can do it directly from Civil 3D, points, polylines, polygons, that kind of thing. And you can also configure settings for all the supported objects. You can pick the styles, the labels. So here I'm going to pick a location like London, for instance, and I'm going to pick a source. And I'll show some examples of different objects that we can import and how we can pick the styles. We can perform queries as well based on the properties. So here we have a number of points. We can import them as AutoCAD points, COGO points, or structures. Those would be structures for a pipe network. I'm going to start with AutoCAD points. Let's look at the settings there. We can pick a folder for the settings template, which we're going to see in a moment. So if I pick that folder there, I can then create a new settings template. I'm going to create a new one. You can, of course, save your own and then reload them. So if I start with AutoCAD objects, which is going to be the AutoCAD points here, I can give the template a name. Let's look at the settings. I add the setting. I can pick the source layer from the query builder, paste it there. And I can create a query based on the properties. So it will, if I add multiple properties, you can combine them with an AND, with an OR. I'm going to delete that one. And I'm going to create a query, for instance, object ID greater than 0. And you can see how it builds that query at the bottom. You can pick the layer, the AutoCAD layer for those objects. So I'm going to pick a layer like vNode. I save that settings file. He will save it as a JSON file. We import those to the drawing. We give it a few seconds and we can see the points there on the map. Let me change the point type so that it displays a bit bigger. So we can see the points there. If I select it, I can see the layer. And in extended data, I can see the properties associated with that point. Okay, let me close that. And I'm going to repeat the process, this time with Kogo points, so we can see the styles that we can configure for that. You will remember the same area that I selected before. I'm going to pick the same source. I'm going to pick Kogo points this time. Same points as before. I'll create a new settings template. Give it a name. You could combine multiple types of objects in the same one. Here I'm doing them sort of individually. So if I add for the Kogo points, copy the source layer. I'm not going to add the query this time, so it will pick all the objects. We can pick the style, the layer, the label style for those points. We can create a point group with the layer name, so it will use that source layer name for the point group. And we have the option to pick AutoCAD point instead of Kogo point, so we could have potentially done the previous one like this as well. We import again. And we have the points there. If I have a look at the point, we can see there it's the Kogo point, the style, the point level style, the layer that we selected, and the extended properties. Okay, let me do one more with polylines this time. I'm going to import some lines as polylines, and I'll comment on the settings in general for all the supported objects. Okay, so it remembers the same area. For this one, I'm going to pick a different area. Instead of a search, I'm going to graphically select that area. And I'm going to pick those regions there. I show them on the map. I'm going to pick AutoCAD polygons. You can see you can do it as feature lines as well. Parcels. I'll focus on AutoCAD objects for this one. I'm going to pick AutoCAD polylines here. You can see alignments, gravity pipes, because it's a polyline. As other options. Let's have a look at the settings. So I'm going to use AutoCAD objects for the polylines, but let me go through the others that we haven't looked at yet. For alignments, you can pick a style, a layer, and you can import it as a 2D polyline or a 3D polyline, not just as an alignment. Feature line, similar options there, style, layer, side. And for the type, it can also be 2D or 3D polyline or a feature line. Similar idea with the parcel, style, layer, and site. So the layer, we'll use the source layer from the GIS file. You can add a gravity pipe, pick the network name, the style and the layer, the structure for a pipe network again, name of the network, style and layer. Let's add some settings here for the polylines. I'm going to pick a name for the settings file. I'm going to pick the source layer. For the two that I added, I'm going to add a second row for the other one. And I can pick a layer. Let's pick a layer for those objects. We pick two AutoCAD layers there from the drawing. We save the settings in the JSON file, import. Give it a moment. And you can see the polylines there that we imported. And if I pick a polyline, it will pick the layer and the extended properties as usual. Okay, so those are the ArcGIS differences, mainly those AutoCAD objects being an option now. Continuing with pressure networks. I'm going to create a pressure network here quickly by path. What's new here is that now you can pick for the reference alignment. This pipe run is a property that you can use, and it will use the name of the pipe run for the alignment. That's linked to the pressure network. So I can sort of draw a pressure network there quickly. And in terms of more new features, let's have a look at that fit in there. And we'll look at some changes that we have now in the style. So if I go to the fitting style, in the plan view, if you use a user-defined block, you now have the option to use a different block for vertical bends if you want to differentiate them from horizontal bends. So you can pick a different block. There are additional sizing options. There used to be fixed scale only. Now you have all those other options as well as you have in other styles in Civil 3D. In the display tab, we can now add a hatch for the fitting. So if I turn that on, I pick a solid hatch pattern, for instance, solid fill, you can see that applied. That is the case for appurtenances as well, not only fittings. You can pick the scaling options and the hatch in appurtenances as well. We have a new system variable which is pipe network sync mode. That system variable will control how the data shortcuts are synchronized for pressure and gravity pipe networks. It can take 3 values, and if value is 0, it will give you a notification to synchronize when the geometry changes. If the value is 1, which is the default value, it will give you that notification when the geometry, the names, or the descriptions change. And if the value is 2, it will give you that notification to synchronize every time the drawing is saved, even if you didn't make any changes in the pipe or pressure network. So that will be the usual way. You can now avoid that notification if you didn't make any changes in the pressure network with those settings of 0 and 1. Okay, coming back to the drawing. If I select a pipe in that pressure network and I hover over that middle grip, I have the option to convert it to an arc. And I can then move that grip to control that arc. Now that it's an arc, if I hover again, I can convert it back to a line. If I look in the contextual ribbon, there are some new options here. We can now merge pressure networks together, so you can combine 2 pressure networks into one. You can merge pipe runs that are connected into a single pipe run. And we have an option to connect to a structure. So what that means is that I can connect a pressure pipe network to a structure in a gravity network. So let me show that. If I create a pipe network, a gravity pipe network if you want. Let's create a network there quickly. Add some pipes and structures there. If I use that option, I can connect that pipe with the structure in the gravity network. Connect to structure. I select the structure. I select the pipe from the pressure network. And it will connect it. And if I select the structure and I move it with the grip, it will remain connected, okay? So now you have that possibility. Let's continue with Project Explorer, which is now a core part of Civil 3D. All Civil 3D customers can access it. You don't need to have an AEC collection license. It's now available to everyone. And it's not just for 2024. Every version that supports Project Explorer will have access to Project Explorer regardless of the license that you have. So you can access Project Explorer in the usual way from the Home tab of the ribbon. It will open the dialog. In 2024, we now have some additional options. You can select an object graphically. I can select that assembly, for instance. And in the right-click menu, we have an Open in Project Explorer option. And that's going to open the dialog for that particular object, that assembly here in this instance. So you will direct the dialog to that particular object. So we can see the corridor region that is used in that particular assembly. So we can see that highlighting when you press Control, as used to be the case in previous versions as well. You can also find the object in Prospector. So if I select an alignment here, in the right-click menu, we again have Open in Project Explorer. And here it's going to go to that alignment. And again, we can highlight it. There's now support for property sets. You can filter, show all the property sets, only the visible ones, hidden, referenced, unreferenced. You will see the property sets, and we can see that in this drawing we have property sets applied to that particular object. There's now support for catchments as well. So if I go to this drawing where we have some catchments, we can now access catchments in Project Explorer. So it's going to open the dialog with the catchments. You can see the catchment that I selected. Okay, I'll continue with corridor transitions. This was introduced in the 2023.2 update, and it allows you to create a transition to any parameter of any subassembly. So even if it doesn't support targets. And you can also control the transition type. So it's something that you can use as an alternative or as a complement to targets. Some of this was already possible in 2023.2. We have this corridor transition in the contextual ribbon, but I'm going to show some examples of that and then focus on the new features for 2024. Okay, so we can create a new transition set from this button. And we have two options. We can pick the subassembly name or the class name for the name of that assembly or that transition, sorry, that transition set. So if I select a subassembly here, I pick that curve there, for instance, that's the name of the subassembly that can be edited. And over there, that's the .NET class name. So yeah, depending on which one you pick, it will use one name or the other. I'll show examples of both. So I'm going to start by showing some examples of transitions to show you how it works, and then I'll talk about what's new in 2024 as well. So I'm going to start by creating a new transition. I'm going to create a dropped curve. So I start by picking the subassembly. You can see it highlighting graphically. I'm going to pick that curve there. I pick the parameter that I want to transition. I'm going to pick depth below. That will control the height of that curve. I want to start with the start chainage of the transition. Let's start at 130. And for the depth below, let's pick 0.3. Let's go to 131. 0.4 for the depth below, and we're going to make a linear transition. We're going to then have a look at all of those types. I can continue adding chainages. I'm going to continue to 135, and I'm going to stay at 0.4 as the depth below. Again, linear. And then finally 136 and 0.3 for the depth below. So notice that the depth below of 0.4 will be the lower height, is where the curve is dropped and we're transitioning from 0.3 to 0.4. So we have the transition set here, the parameter that we use, depth below, the subassembly name, and we're going from 0.3 to 0.4 across that 1 meter. The transition type is linear. We have all those types. I'll show those types in the next one. We stay with the lower height for those 4 meters, and then in that meter, we're transitioning back to the 0.3 depth below. You can see how it's showing where the transition is in the drawing. If I have a look in a 3D view, in Object Viewer, it's sort of over there. You can see that we don't see the dropped curve yet. We need to apply that transition. So if I click on Apply, it will remodel the corridor. You can see how it changed there. If we have a look at the 3D view again, focus on that area. You can now see the dropped curve there. So we can see we're going from the normal curve, if you want, to the dropped curve there in that transition. Then we're staying with the dropped curve and we transition back. Okay, so the second example, I'm going to transition the daylight or the earthworks, if you want, the butter of the road. We have 2 regions here in the corridor. And if we look at the assemblies, we're going from a 1 and 2 slope to 1 and 5 slope. We're going to create a transition. At the moment, when it changes the region, because I don't have the transition applied yet, if I show the frequency lines there, you can see that it will do it suddenly from the end of the region to the first frequency line there, or to the first link. I'm going to transition that over a longer length, and I can control the transition type as well. So I create a new transition set for that daylight, pick earthworks. Let's pick the cut slope parameter. And now it's the same process. We start with the start chainage. Let's start at that 290. The parameter is 2 for a 1 and 2 slope. And let's say 295 for the end. And the parameter 5 for 1 and 5. And let's pick linear for now as a transition type. You can see there, if I apply, it's going to show the transition. We have it as linear at the moment. Let's have a look at the other types. Day taper. You can see how it changed. Zoom in a little bit. Cubic in. You will keep the tangency point at the end. Cubic out. You will keep the tangency point at the start. Parabolic in and parabolic out, same idea, but instead of a cubic curve, it's going to be a parabola. So I can pick parabolic out. And the last one, reverse parabolic. And you can see how it creates the transition. I'm going to keep that one. I'll show a third example, and then I'll focus more on the new features. I can create another transition, and I'm going to create a widening now. I'll pick the class name. This is a new feature, having the ability to pick that class name. I'm going to pick that lane, and I follow the same process again. I pick the parameter, I'll transition the width, so it will list all the parameters from the subassembly. And we type the chain needs. We're going to start chain is 20, 3.65 for the width. I'm going to double the width, chain is 30, 7.3, linear transition for now. I'll go to chain it's 70, 7.3 again, linear, and then I'll transition back to the original width, chain it's 60, 3.65. Again, linear for now. We can see that transition set in the palette. You can see the transition then there, transition set. Let's apply it. Notice that blue marker there, that indicates that we're using the .NET class name rather than the subassembly name. Okay, so we can see here that linear transition. If I pick bay taper, for instance, at the start and at the end, and apply it, you're going to see those transitions changing. You can see the transition there changing. Okay, what I'll focus on now is new features for 2024. So we have this ability to import and export transitions. So if you have two different options, or if you want to export it to a separate file, you can export all of those transition sets to an external file. You will create a CSV file that we can save, and then we can import that back again as a separate file, or perhaps you have two options. You can switch between them by loading one file or the other. I have another drawing here. So this is the initial version of the drawing if you want, without the transitions. If I go to edit Corel transition, I don't have the transitions here applied. I can now load them from the file. If I show you the file, you can see here the different parameters in the file. If I import, pick that button, I can import a CSV file, and it's going to load those transitions. And if I apply, you will see how it changes in plan. We can see a transition there to the widening, the daylight, the dropped curve. If I pick that widening transition, I can use the arrows to reorder. So I can bring them up to the top so that they're in the right sequence for the chain it if you want. You can move them up and down. You have this option to lock the transition set. So let me show you what happens if I change that end station, which is that one, and it's not locked. Change it to 80, for instance. I apply. It's going to just change that particular chainage, and it will keep the rest of the transition set where it was. You can see that transition. Let me change it back to 60 and apply. If I lock it and I change it to 80 again, what's going to happen is that it's going to shift the whole transition by 20 meters. So it's not only moving that final chainage, it's going to increase all the chainages by 20 if you want. It will move the whole transition set 20 to the right. You can see it will move the whole thing. Okay, so you now have that option. If I pick a transition set, like this one, and I right click, I have the option to zoom to that transition. You can see the transition there. I can zoom to another one there. And it will focus on that widening. From the right click menu, I also have the option to pan to a transition. The difference being that it will not change the zoom level. It will center it in the screen if you want, but it will not change the zoom level when you pan. And another thing I want to mention about transitions is that they are now included in the Civil 3D API in this 2024 version. So you can use transitions in the Civil 3D API. Okay, let's conclude with the assemblies, the sub-assemblies. We can now import an assembly, and when we import the assembly, we have there an assembly which is empty. When we import it, we have an option now to directly link the PIC80 file, so it will no longer create a copy in the program data folder as it was the case. You can directly link to wherever you saved your PIC80 file. That can be a network location or an ACC folder. So I can pick that PIC80 file there and insert that custom subassembly. We can see the assembly there. We can insert it in that assembly that is applied to the corridor with that alignment that we see on the left. If we rebuild the corridor, it can show the assembly being applied. If I look in Prospector, there's now a sub-assemblies node where I can see the sub-assembly. We can see the source path that we linked. We can see the version and the status, which is okay. It can be out of date if you make changes to the PIC80 file, or file not found if you move that PIC80 file. We'll see examples of that and how to fix it. I have here a new version of that subassembly. I made some changes. I added that back slope on both ends. And I'm going to override the previous one. I'm going to save on that same PKT file that I linked. So it's now a different subassembly. I'll replace it. If I go back to the drawing and I refresh, you can see that now we get a warning sign in the corridor in the subassembly. If I select the subassembly, you can see that it's out of date. I made some changes. I have a new version, version 2. You can see there in Subassembly Composer. That's something you can manually change in Subassembly Composer. So if I look at that version, I have still version 1, so I need to correct that. If I update the subassembly, it will reload the PKT file. Now we have version 2. The status is OK, and you can see the subassembly changing there. If I rebuild the corridor, you can see that extra line. So it has updated the corridor with the new assembly as well. And notice that we did all that without the need to restart Civil 3D, as used to be the case. We have Civil 3D open, Subassembly Composer open. We can make changes, save, and then we simply reload and we can see the changes. If I now insert the subassembly from the palette, you can see that it has updated that one as well. That's also version 2. Okay, let me show you what happens if I move that to a different folder. So I have this in the PKT files folder. I'm going to move it to that alternative folder. So where it used to be, it's now an empty folder. So if I refresh, you can see a warning sign, file not found. So if we want to fix that, we can fix the missing path. We can browse to the new location. Let's apply that. And now the status goes back to OK. Okay, so that's essentially what I wanted to show.
Thanks very much, Enrique. No, that was very informative. It was great to see how it's evolving, which is important.
Yeah, thank you.